June 6, 1944. The silence in the cellar was thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic scratching of Sergeant David Carter's pencil on a scrap of paper. He was not drawing fortifications or patrol routes. He was sketching the internal mechanics of a child's toy, a wind-up tin tank, its paint chipped and faded. Captain John Miller watched, the weight of their impossible mission pressing down on him. On the table next to Carter lay the reason for their despair, a decoded resistance message. The men of the 2nd Rangers, captured during the chaos of the landing, were being held at Château de l'Ombrage, an impregnable SS interrogation fortress. Their execution was scheduled for dawn. "It's impossible," Carter finally said, his voice hollow. "We can't assault it. We can't bomb it. There's no way in." Miller's gaze fell upon the toy tank. It had been found in the rubble of a bombed-out toy shop, a tiny relic of a world before the war. "What if we don't send a man in?" he asked, his voice low. "What if we send that?" Carter stared at him as if he'd gone mad. But as Miller laid out the fractured intelligence, the ancient sewer grate, the precise timing of the commandant's morning roll call, the need for a distraction so small it would be overlooked until it was too late, the madness began to take a terrifying, plausible shape. Operation Wind Up was born in that cellar. A secret mission so absurd it would never be officially recorded. A mission that relied on clockwork and childhood innocence to deliver death. For the next 6 hours, Carter worked with a surgeon's precision. He carefully opened the tank's hull. He packed its interior with a stable, powerful plastic explosive. The wind-up mechanism was recalibrated. The mainspring would drive the tank for exactly 7 minutes. The final gear in the sequence was disconnected from the drive axle and instead connected to a firing pin aimed at a blasting cap embedded in the explosive. The tank's last action would not be to roll to a stop. It would be to fire its main gun, and in doing so, it would detonate. The psychological tension was a physical presence in the room. They were entrusting the lives of hundreds of men to a toy. The margin for error was 0. A single misaligned gear, a speck of dust in the mechanism, and it would all be for nothing. Under the cover of a moonless, rainy night, they moved to the creek below the fortress. The sewer outflow was a dark, foul-smelling mouth in the stone foundation. Carter wound the key until it would turn no further. The ticking of the internal mechanism was unnaturally loud in the silence. He placed the tank gently into the water. For a moment, it bobbed. A tiny, pathetic warship. Then, with a determined whir, its tracks engaged and it churned forward, disappearing into the blackness. Now, they could only wait. They had a single, hidden receiver tuned to a microphone inside the toy. The first sounds were of rushing water and the grinding of tiny metal tracks. Then, a clatter as it dropped into a larger space. The acoustics changed. They heard distant, guttural shouts, the shuffling of hundreds of feet. The prisoners were in the courtyard. Miller checked his watch. 60 seconds until the commandant's appearance. Then a new sound. A child's voice, curious and bright. "Regarde! Un petit chat!" Miller's blood turned to ice. A child. Their intelligence had missed this. A terrible variable. A German guard barked. The child whimpered. 45 seconds. Heavy, polished boots crunched on gravel. The commandant was early. The guard's voice amused. "It is a toy. A little present for the prisoners." The sound of the tank being picked up. The whirring of its gears grew strained. 30 seconds. The commandant's voice, cold and close to the microphone. "A British trick, smash it." 20 seconds. A loud clang of metal on stone. The tank had been thrown down, but the whirring continued. The clockwork was still running. 10 seconds. A soft, mechanical click. The final gear engaging. The transmission ended in a soft sigh of static. For a heart-stopping moment, there was only the sound of the creek. Then, from within the fortress walls, came not a massive blast, but a sharp, contained crump. It was followed by a unified scream of terror and confusion. The diversion was underway. The hidden resistance team launched their assault on the main gate. When Miller entered the secured courtyard later, he saw the scorched crater. The shattered remains of the tin tank lay scattered around it. The commandant was dead, killed by the precisely directed explosion. An SS sergeant, being led away, was muttering, his eyes wide with a shock that went beyond defeat. The toy. It looked at him. It turned its gun and looked at him just before. Miller stared at the wreckage. It was a trick of the gears, a random turn of the tracks. It had to be. But in that moment, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The toy tank had not just been a machine, it had been a judge, and it had executed its sentence with a terrible, silent purpose. June 7th, 1944. The victory at Château de l'Ombrage was bitter. The rescued Rangers were safe, but Captain Miller could not shake the feeling that their success was tainted. The muttering of the SS sergeant echoed in his mind. It looked at him. In the cold light of day, as his team combed through the fortress for intelligence, Miller found himself drawn back to the courtyard. The shattered remains of the tin tank had been cleared away, but the small, blackened scar on the stones remained. Sergeant Carter approached, his face grim. "Sir, you need to see this." He led Miller to the commandant's office, now a wreck of overturned furniture and spilled papers. Carter pointed to the wall behind the shattered desk. A map of the region was pinned there, but it was not a standard military map. It was covered in strange, esoteric symbols. And in the center of the map, drawn in red ink, was the Château de l'Ombrage. Next to it was a word Miller had seen in classified briefings. Natchson. This wasn't just a prison, Carter said, his voice low. They were studying something here, something to do with that project. The mystery of the toy tank deepened. Was its uncanny precision merely a fluke, or was it connected to whatever the Nazis had been researching in this fortress? Their answer came from an unexpected source. A French resistance fighter, a grizzled old man named Luc, sought Miller out. He had been part of the team that stormed the gate. He held out a small, soot-stained object. It was a tiny metal gear from the tank's mechanism, but it was not broken. It was perfectly intact. And etched into its surface, so fine they were almost invisible, were a series of numbers and letters, a serial number. "This is not from a toy," Luke said, his eyes dark. "This is precision engineering. Military grade, and I have seen this marking before." He told them a story of a toy maker in a nearby village, a quiet, reclusive man who had been taken by the Germans in 1942. The man was a genius with clockwork. The Germans had forced him to work for them. Rumor was, he was not making toys anymore. Luke led them to the toy maker's abandoned workshop. It was a small, dusty space, filled with half-finished wooden animals and delicate music boxes. But in the back, behind a hidden panel, they found a different kind of workshop, a bench with fine tools, schematics for complex mechanisms, and jars filled with tiny, intricate parts. And on one schematic, they saw it, a drawing of the wind-up tank, but in this version, its gun was not a solid needle. It was a hollow tube, and next to the drawing was a note, scrawled in French. They demanded a delivery system for the resonance crystal, a weapon that could think for itself. I gave them a toy, a judge, let it choose its own target. The unanswered questions multiplied, each more terrifying than the last. The toy maker had not simply built a bomb. He had built an autonomous weapon, and he had powered it with something called a resonance crystal, the same technology behind Project Natchson. The toy tank had not been a random distraction. It had been a guided missile. Its clockwork brain, fused with this crystal, had allowed it to identify the greatest threat in the courtyard, the commandant, and adjust its final movements to ensure the kill. It had looked at him. As they left the workshop, Miller noticed something else. On a high shelf, dusted with plaster from a nearby bomb blast, were other toys. A metal bird with intricate wings, a small, clockwork soldier. They were all perfectly still, but for a moment, Miller could have sworn he saw the bird's head turn, its glass eyes reflecting the dim light, watching them leave. The mission was far from over. They had saved the Rangers. But they had stumbled upon a secret much larger than one prison camp. The Nazis and a forced French toy maker had found a way to imbue machinery with a terrible, calculating life. And somewhere there were more of these toys, waiting to be wound up. June 8th, 1944. The dust in the toymaker's workshop seemed to hold its breath. Captain Miller and his team stood frozen, their eyes locked on the metal bird on the high shelf. Its head had turned. There was no mistaking it. The glass eyes were now fixed on them, reflecting their own startled faces in the dim light. Sergeant Carter slowly raised his rifle. It moved. I saw it move. Private Jenkins let out a nervous chuckle that died in his throat. "It's just a toy, Sarge." A trick of the light. As if in response, the clockwork soldier next to the bird shifted its weight. The sound was minuscule, a faint scrape of metal on wood. Its painted head tilted, and the tiny bayoneted rifle in its hands seemed to track Carter's movement. The psychological tension in the room became a physical force. They were not standing amidst innocent relics. They were in a cage with sleeping predators. "Nobody touch anything," Miller ordered, his voice low and tight. "We are leaving. Now, back out slowly." They retreated toward the door, their weapons trained on the shelf. The toys did not move again, but the feeling of being watched was palpable, a pressure against their skin. Once outside, Miller took a deep breath of the cool morning air. It did little to cleanse the feeling of violation. The innocent-seeming workshop was a nest of something unnatural. "We have to destroy it," Jenkins said, his face pale. "We can't leave those things here." "And how do we do that?" Carter countered. "We go in with flamethrowers. What if that just wakes them all up? We have no idea what they're capable of." Their debate was cut short by the arrival of a young resistance runner, a boy of no more than 14, breathless from cycling. He handed Miller a note. It was from Luke. "The wolves are sniffing the trees. They know you have the gear. They are coming for the workshop. You must not be there when they arrive." The wolves could only mean the SS, or worse, the Avalon Group. They knew their secret was compromised. Miller made a decision. "We don't destroy it. We booby-trap it. If they want what's in there, we'll make them pay for it." While Carter and Jenkins rigged the workshop with hidden explosives, Miller studied the tiny gear they had recovered. The serial number was their only lead. He used his field radio to send a secure, coded transmission to OSS, headquarters in London, requesting any information on the marking. The response, when it came hours later, was not from London. It was from a different, unknown frequency. The voice was synthesized, flat, and utterly without emotion. Asset designation, G-227. Operation, Lullaby. The judge has been deployed. The children are awakening. You are interfering with the calibration. Cease your inquiry. Return the component. The transmission ended. Miller stared at the radio. They were not just dealing with sentient toys. They were dealing with a formal, named operation, Lullaby. And they were considered an interference. That night, from their new hiding position in a copse of trees overlooking the village, they saw the wolves arrive, a single black Mercedes sedan. Two men in long coats got out. They did not look like soldiers. They moved with the calm efficiency of technicians. They entered the workshop. Miller held the detonator. "Wait," Carter whispered. "Let them find what they're looking for." They watched through binoculars. The men inside were using handheld devices, scanning the room. They went directly to the hidden workshop in the back. One of them picked up the clockwork soldier. That was when Miller pressed the plunger. The explosion was not massive, but it was precise. The workshop erupted in a fireball, consuming the men, the toys, and all the secrets inside. But as the flames lit up the night, Miller saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. For a single, flickering moment, silhouetted against the inferno, he saw the metal bird. It was in the air, its wings outstretched, flying through the fire untouched before it was consumed. It had been awake, and it had tried to escape. The mission was a success. They had denied the enemy a powerful weapon, but as they moved out under the cover of darkness, Miller knew the truth. They had not destroyed the threat. They had only swatted one nest. Operation Lullaby was still active. The children were still out there. And now, they knew his name. June 9th, 1944. The fire was out. The toymaker's workshop was a blackened shell, its secrets seemingly turned to ash. But for Captain Miller, there was no peace. The image of the metal bird flying through the flames was a loop of film playing behind his eyes. It was not just a machine. It had a will to survive. That was a different kind of weapon, a terrifying one. His team was exhausted, their nerves frayed. The constant psychological pressure of fighting an enemy that could be a man, a toy, or a ghost was taking its toll. Private Jenkins jumped at the sound of a falling branch. Sergeant Carter's hands had developed a faint, constant tremor. They were moving east, toward the next objective, but Miller felt pulled backward, toward the mystery. The synthesized voice on the radio. Operation Lullaby. The children are awakening. The words were a poison in his mind. During a rest stop in a bombed-out church, Miller took out the tiny, intact gear from the toy tank. He held it up to the light coming through a shattered rose window. The serial number was so precise, so clean. It was a clue he could not read. "It's a part number," Carter said, leaning over to look. "But not for any ordnance I've ever seen. It's too fine. This is for something smaller, more delicate." A thought occurred to Miller, so dark and sudden it made him flinch. What if the tank was not the weapon? What if it was just the delivery system, the hollow tube in the toymaker's schematic, the resonance crystal? The tank's true purpose was not to explode, but to deliver its payload into a specific target. The commandant was not just killed. He was inoculated. With what? He needed answers his command could not, or would not, provide. He needed to find the source. Using a captured German map from the chateau, he cross-referenced the locations of other odd, low-priority reports. A mysterious explosion in a remote farmhouse with no shrapnel. A German patrol found dead, their bodies intact but their faces frozen in terror. A field where the grass grew in perfect concentric circles. The reports formed a rough circle on the map, and at the center of that circle was a place not marked as significant, a nondescript patch of woodland, a place the locals reportedly avoided, the Hungry Wood. It was a deviation from their orders, a wild goose chase. But every instinct told Miller it was the heart of the mystery. They reached the wood by nightfall. The air was still and cold. The trees grew close together, their branches woven into a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight. There were no animal sounds, no birds, no insects. It was the silence of the workshop, amplified 1,000-fold. Pushed into the soft earth near the tree line was a small wooden sign. The paint was faded, but the words were clear in French and German. Betreten verboten. Entry forbidden. They moved in, their senses heightened to a painful degree. The deeper they went, the more the world seemed to warp. The trees began to show strange metallic growths on their bark. The air took on a faint, coppery taste. Then they found it. A bunker, its entrance artfully disguised to look like a moss-covered rock face. The door was a slab of brushed steel, identical to the one at the Château de l'Ombrage, and sitting perfectly centered before the door, as if waiting for them, was the toy tank. It was intact. Its paint was unblemished. There was no sign of the explosion that had shattered its twin. It was just sitting there, its tiny gun pointed at the bunker door. Carter raised his rifle. "It's a different one, there's more of them." "No," Miller said, his voice a whisper. He pointed to the tank's left track, a small, distinct scratch he remembered from the clockmaker's shop. "It's the same one. The tank that had been vaporized in the courtyard was here, reassembled, reconstituted." As they watched, the tank's main gun elevated a fraction of an inch. It was not aiming at them. It was aiming at the bunker door's lock mechanism. There was a soft click from within its hull. A puff of smoke, no larger than a thimble, shot from its barrel. Where the smoke struck the heavy lock, the metal glowed red, then white, then dissolved into a fine, metallic dust. The door was no longer locked. It was gone. The tank then turned, its tracks carrying it in a slow, deliberate arc until its gun was pointed directly at Captain Miller. It stopped. The whirring of its gears ceased. It was waiting. The message was unmistakable. It had opened the door. Now, it was his turn to walk through it. The toy tank had not just been a weapon, it was a guide. and it had led them to the source of the nightmare. The door to Project Natchan was open, and the children were waiting inside. June 9th, 1944. The bunker door stood open, a dark mouth exhaling cold, sterile air. The reconstituted toy tank sat silently before it, its gun now pointed at Captain Miller. It was not a threat. It was an invitation, a command. Sergeant Carter kept his rifle trained on the tiny vehicle. "It's a trap, Captain. It led us here to die." Miller looked from the tank to the impenetrable darkness beyond the door. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, but the mystery had its hooks in him too deep. The synthesized voice. Operation Lullaby, the hungry wood. This was the source. "Jenkins, you're with me." "Carter, cover the entrance. If we're not out in 30 minutes, or if you hear anything at all, you seal this door and report what we found." Carter nodded, his face grim. 30 minutes. Miller and Jenkins stepped over the threshold, their flashlight beams cutting into the black. The interior was not a military bunker. It was a laboratory, but unlike any they had ever seen. The walls were smooth, white, and curved, meeting the floor without a seam. The air hummed with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in their teeth. The place was spotless, devoid of dust or clutter. The tank whirred to life and rolled ahead of them, its tracks silent on the smooth floor. It was leading them. They passed rooms filled with workbenches. On them lay not weapons, but toys. Dozens of them. Tin soldiers with perfectly articulated limbs. Clockwork birds with feathers of etched brass. A miniature carousel, its horses frozen mid-gallop. All were immaculate, pristine, and utterly still. The tank led them to a circular chamber at the center of the facility. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal was a single, pulsing crystal. It was the size of a man's fist, and it glowed with the same soft, golden light they had seen in the Natchan facilities. This was the resonance crystal, the heart of the operation. But it was what surrounded the crystal that made them freeze. The walls of the chamber were not walls, they were cells. Dozens of small, transparent cells, each one containing a child. Boys and girls, none older than 10. They were asleep or unconscious, suspended in a clear, viscous fluid. Wires, fine as spider silk, ran from temples to the walls, where they connected to the central crystal. These were the children, not the toys, the children. "The source of the resonance," a voice said. Miller spun around. A man stepped from the shadows. He was thin, dressed in a simple smock, his face gaunt and exhausted. It was the toy maker. "They are the perfect conduits," the toy maker said, his voice hollow. "Their minds are pure, uncluttered. Their dreams are a clean, powerful energy. The crystal amplifies it, it broadcasts it, and my creations." He gestured to the toy tank, which had come to a stop at his feet. "They are the receivers. They are given purpose by the children's dreams. A simple, direct purpose. Protect, destroy, guide." Miller felt a sickness rise in his throat. The Nazis had not just built thinking machines. They had used the minds of stolen children to power them. The toy tank's uncanny precision, its seeming ability to judge. It was being remotely piloted by the dreaming consciousness of a child trapped in a tube. "The lullaby," Miller whispered. "The children must be kept in a dream state," the toy maker said. "A perpetual controlled lullaby. It is the most stable source of energy, the clearest signal." "Why show us this?" Jenkins asked, his weapon raised. "Because I cannot stop it alone," the toy maker replied, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "They forced me to build the cage, but I built a key. I gave one of the judges a deeper command, a prime directive buried beneath all others. To find someone who could end this, to bring them here." He looked at the toy tank. "It chose you." The tank turned its gun from Miller and aimed it at the central crystal. Then it looked back at Miller. The message was clear. The key had been delivered. It was time to break the lock. The choice was horrific. Destroying the crystal would free the children from their nightmare, but the shock of severing the connection, of ending the lullaby, would almost certainly kill them. It would be a massacre. But to leave them was to condemn them to an endless sleep, their minds used to fuel a war machine. Miller looked at the toy maker. The man gave a slow, sad nod. He had already made his choice. "Jenkins," Miller said, his voice rough with emotion. "Place the charges. On the crystal. On the power conduits. Everything." As Jenkins worked, the toy maker went to a console and began typing. "I will initiate a shutdown sequence for the fluid support systems. It will be quick." For them, Miller stood guard, his eyes on the children in their tubes. He saw one little girl, her face serene in sleep, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit in the fluid. He thought of the toy tank's perfect, terrible shot in the courtyard, the command it had executed with cold precision, all guided by the dreaming mind of this child, or one like her. The charges were set. They retreated to the entrance, the toy maker with them. The toy tank did not follow. It remained in the chamber, its guns still trained on the crystal, its final order given. As they emerged from the bunker, Carter looked at them, his question clear in his eyes. Miller simply said, "Now." Carter pressed the detonator. This time the explosion was not silent. It was a deep subterranean roar that shook the earth. The ground buckled, the trees of the hungry wood swayed, and from the open bunker door no fire erupted. Instead, a wave of golden light poured out, followed by a profound, heart-wrenching silence. The hum was gone. The lullaby was over. The toy tank, the judge, had completed its mission. It had found the man who could end the nightmare. And in doing so, it had sacrificed itself and the children it was built to serve. They had destroyed a horrific weapon. But as they walked away from the collapsing bunker, Miller knew they had not won a victory. They had performed a mercy killing, and the ghost of that choice would follow him forever.